They said if Abe Lincoln was elected president, they would leave the Union, form their own government. Perhaps they were thinking of this speech. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I do not believe this country can endure permanently, half slave, half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be half slave and half free. It will become all one thing, or all the other. Well, sure enough, I was elected president. Shortly after that, South Carolina, followed by other states, left the Union and formed the Confederacy. Here I was, president of the United States, only they were no longer united. Half of the country wanted war. It was now time for me to make my first speech as president. What could I say to change their minds? What could I say in this speech to pull the country back together? We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Old passions may have strained, they must not break our bonds of affection. Mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot's heart to every heart and hearthstone will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. But the war came. Now I had to switch hats, going from peacemaker to commander-in-chief. All this and run the country. One of the things that took up my time were these folks wanting government jobs. Office seekers, we call them. There was no end to them. They covered me like ants. Why? Even when word would get out the current office holder had passed away, they would line up to fill that open position. Once I was accosted in the hallway. A fellow grabbed my arm. He had heard about the death of a postmaster. He grabbed my arm and said, "Mr. President, you just got to let me take his place." I said, "Well, that's fine with me, but I'll have to check with the undertaker first." But the first priority was the war. When the war broke out, even before I took the office of president, there were thousands of people living in the North who sympathized with the South. Many of these lived in Baltimore. Even before I took office, I had to sneak through Baltimore in the wee hours of the morning, slouch down in the car of a train so that I wouldn't appear to be the tall man in the top hat, just to get there alive. And now these same men had attacked Union soldiers on their way to protect the Capitol. When I got this news, I took drastic measures. I had them all arrested and held without trial. In other words, I suspended habeas corpus. Now, since this was a constitutional matter, I wanted to meet with my cabinet to discuss it first. Gentlemen, we are gathered here today to discuss my plans to suspend habeas corpus. Now, I am given that right by the Constitution during times of rebellion. But I want to get your opinion. Please indicate your vote yea or nay. What say you, Secretary of State Seward? Nay. And you, Secretary of War Stanton? Nay. Secretary of the Treasury Chase? Nay. Attorney General Blair? Attorney General Bates? Nay. Postmaster General Blair? Nay. Secretary of the Navy, Wells. Nay. Secretary of the Interior, Mr. Smith. Nay. So it's nay, 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 nay. Well, gentlemen, the ayes have it. Gentlemen, these attackers are like mad dogs. It reminds me of the story of the farmer was walking down the lane with his pitchfork over his shoulder. Neighbor's mad dog comes out and attacks him. Well, he had no choice but to kill the dog with the pitchfork. Well, now the neighbor comes running out. Why'd you kill my dog? Well, why'd your dog attack me? Well, why couldn't you just fend him off with the blunt end? Well, why didn't your dog attack me with his blunt end? Everyone was hoping it'd be a short war. But my hopes were dashed when I saw my generals in action. And I mean, in action. McClellan was the worst. He didn't want to fight a war. He really wanted to be president of the United States. He proved that by running against me in 1864. It was his plan, I found out later, just to march the armies around until they all got tired and then negotiate with the South, let them be their own government. He was trying to ride two horses, one of war and one of peace at the same time. He was very hesitant to fight, always imagining there were thousands more of the opposition than there really were. I met with him once near the battle lines in his tent. The conversation went like this. Mr. President, we successfully engaged the enemy and then repositioned our forces 50 miles to the north. Unfortunately, General, our objective lies to the south. But he continued to brag about what a great military man he was. I said, he reminded me of the fellow who had a dog and kept bragging about what a great wolf hunter this dog was. He said all day long the dog just did nothing but hunt wolves. Well, his friends got together and decided to call this bluff and invited him on a wolf hunt. Well, the next morning they crested the hill, the dog saw the wolves saw the dog, and off they ran. Well, they lost sight of him through the woods, but when they come out on the other side, they saw an old man walking down the road. Have you seen him? Yep, I did. Well, what was their position? Well, last time I saw him, the dog was slightly ahead. You'll have to excuse my little humorous stories. I've always tried to use humor to get through even the most serious of times. Sometimes it backfired. Two women were overheard on a train one time saying, I think the South will win because Jeff Davis is a praying man. Well, so's Abe Lincoln, replied her friend. I know, but God will think Abe is joking. Back to my generals. One of them would send me telegrams from headquarters in the saddle. I said, that's your problem, General. You don't know you got your headquarters where your hindquarters should be. Once I telegraphed McClellan, General, if you're not going to use your army, might I borrow it? Well, if I had to fire him and hired this man, General Ulysses S. Grant. Now, he could fight, not only fight, but win. Oh, he had some criticism about drinking too much whiskey, but when that would come up, I would say, find out what kind of whiskey this man drinks, and send a barrel of it to my other generals. But we were finally making progress. Along with General Grant, successes by General Meade, General Sherman, and General Sheridan, we were finally making some progress, but not without great cost in human life. In the end, over 600,000 men on both sides would lose their lives. I had to find a way of stopping this bloodshed. I had plenty of advice. That was a subject that came up all the time. Because of my speeches in the past, I was now called upon to take that action. Horace Greeley, the most famous newspaper editor in the country, said I was backing away from my promises. I would say I may walk slowly, but I never walk backwards. Now, what Mr. Greeley did not know is that even before I received that letter, I'd already prepared a draft of emancipation. I wrote him back. Dear Mr. Greeley, as to my policy, if I could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing none of the slaves, I would do it. If I could save the Union by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that. I have here stated my public policy, not to be confused with my oft expressed opinion that all men everywhere be free. I was just waiting for the right time. I needed a decisive victory for the North, which finally came. It was now time to announce this emancipation. However, this document is one of the most misunderstood documents in U.S. history. Some assume it simply freed all the slaves. That would be coming to the wrong conclusion. I used this emancipation under the War Powers Act, where I was allowed to confiscate enemy territory. Now, all along, the South said those slaves were property. It was that property I was confiscating. This emancipation didn't free any of the slaves up in the border states. You see, there were border states who owned slaves, yet remained loyal to the Union. I did not want them to leave the Union at this time. Their time would come. This was a military strategy. You see, it was my idea that the South saw all these slaves putting on Union uniforms, taking up arms. It would shock them into laying down their arms and ending this bloody rebellion. In the following summer, the Battle of Gettysburg was fought and won by Union General Meade. But again, great cost, over 8,000 casualties on both sides. In the summer, in the fall rather, I was invited there to give a speech as part of dedication to the cemetery for all those fallen soldiers. What could I say? What would I say?
Now, in the midst of a tragic war not yet won, a lot of folks gather at Gettysburg for a dedication, and among them is the President. He looks older now, seldom smiles. War's been so long, so many dead on both sides. After a while, after the main speaker, he has a few words to say.
Fourscore, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived, so dedicated, can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come here to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place to those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Those brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, consecrated it far above our poor power to add and detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, rather, the living, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work that those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us, rather, to be here dedicated to the great task that lies before us. From these dead we take increased devotion for that cause for which they gave their last full measure of freedom. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Not only did I have to deal with the rise in casualty lists, now there's another issue. From time to time, young Union soldiers, out of fear, would run from the battle lines. I had to figure out ways of helping them avoid the firing squad. Sometimes it was all too easy. Dear Secretary of War Stanton, as to the 14-year-old waiting to be shot, let us spank this 14-year-old drummer boy and send him home to his mother. Well, now in 1865, General Sherman had finished his horrific yet successful march to the sea. General Grant took Vicksburg, giving Union forces full control of the Mississippi, and then went on to defeat the Confederate Army at Chattanooga. And with rising casualties, Richmond finally fell, which forced General Lee to surrender to General Grant at Appomattox. Now it was time for healing. It was also time for my second inaugural speech. In that speech, I spoke not in a victorious tone, but in one of reconciliation. As tens of thousands stood in the mud-soaked Pennsylvania Avenue, I said, both parties deprecated war. One party would make war rather than let the nation survive. The other would accept war rather than to let it perish. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or duration it has already attained. Both read the same Bible, pray to the same God, and invoke His aid against the other. God could not answer both prayers. With malice toward none, charity for all, let us drive on, finish the work we're in. Bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan, and to do all to achieve a just and lasting peace amongst ourselves and with all nations.